Hello and welcome to the second episode of J&J's Misadventures.
My name is Pure Toxic.
And I'm the Monster Bull.
In this episode, we're going to tell another story of Jimmy McGee and Jake Jackson, the two roleplay characters that we play as on our 5M roleplay server called Lore-Based Roleplay. So welcome to the second episode of J&J's Misadventures, The Duke's Getaway. In today's episode, we will be telling one of the stories involving Jake and Jimmy's favorite pastimes, running from the police.
This time, the boys stole a 1969 Imponte Dukes from the parking lot of a small motel on Route 68. They brought the Dukes to a mechanic shop not far away from the motel parking lot where they stole it that they frequently use when the boys are hanging out in Blaine County.
After they had brought it back from their shop, they began by upgrading the engine with 4-barrel carburetors, a new exhaust system starting at the headers, going all the way to the rear of the car, and upgraded suspension so it could handle the rough terrain of Blaine County. After which, they resprayed the car bright orange, and last but not least, they put an American flag on the roof of the newly painted muscle car, because they saw a similar car in an old 80s show. Then after all that, Jake hopped into the driver's seat and turned on the ignition.
The engine started immediately with a loud roar. They were both very excited and started jumping around and giving each other high fives. When they calmed down, they came up with the idea to try and recreate the show that they had seen. So they fueled up the car and were ready to begin this new adventure.
They went into the nearby town of Sandy Shores and drove around a bit, spotting all the patrol cars. But while they were cruising around trying to figure out where the police were patrolling, they noticed that there were some sort of food delivery cars setting up a couple of tables on a dusty road paralleling the train tracks next to the main road, known as East Joshua Road. That's when they came up with the idea of ramming through the unintentionally improvised plastic table roadblock set up by the food delivery driver.
Jake and Jimmy took a left turn, entering East Joshua Road with the plan to drive for about 100 meters and then turn right onto the paralleling dirt road so they could have enough of a distance to build up some speed to smash through the tables. But before they even got onto the dirt road, they got pulled over onto East Joshua Road, right next to said tables.
2 police officers stepped out of their car and the driver went up to the passenger window of the Dukes, while the other officers stayed next to the Granger police SUV. Before Jimmy or Jake could even say a word, the officer said, "I am pulling you over because your vehicle isn't registered," which was something that the duo were very aware of since they stole the car and swapped out the car's original license plate for one that said Jen Lee.
The officer promptly asked for Jake's driver's license and registration since Jake was the one driving the Dukes, but instead of giving his actual ID, Jake gave a Burger Shot ID card. The officer, who didn't seem to care for it, handed it back and asked for Jake's real driver's license and papers for the vehicle, to which both Jake and Jimmy replied that they were in the glove box. And then Jimmy, who was in the passenger seat, grabbed out all of the papers the previous owner had in there, most of which were utterly irrelevant, and gave them to the officer with a smile. The officer then again asked for a driver's license, to which they responded by handing over a Burger Shot receipt.
Jimmy and Jake thought it was increasingly funny to mess with this cop by acting so incompetent that they had a hard time fighting back the urge to burst out laughing throughout the whole ordeal.
The officer, who was at this point growing more and more frustrated and was clearly not amused by this juvenile attempt at humor, responded by going back to his other officer who was standing by their police car, and by the time he got to his colleague, the boys were already pulling away, leaving a large cloud of dust behind them.
They took a sharp right onto the dirt road from before and crashed through the tables, jumped over the asphalt street and onto the other dirt road, going as fast as they possibly could. The primary police officer was a solid way back, even though the vehicle was way better equipped for the harsh driving conditions provided by the dirt roads, considering its brand new 4x4 system and police-rated heavy-duty suspension. Jake knew that within a short amount of time, the officers in the SUV were going to catch up, so he hooked a sharp right turn off of the dirt roads back onto the asphalt. The officers in pursuit, but with the gap only getting bigger, Jake turned back onto the dirt road. Thanks to the gap the boys gained, the officers continued straight past them. At this point, the boys headed straight back onto the town and refueled the gas-guzzling beast.
Promptly after pulling out of the gas station, a police officer spotted them, and the chase was on again. The boys took them on a chase all around town and the surrounding desert, but once they got onto the highway, things started going south. The police were catching up, and to avoid getting pit maneuvered, Jake went into the opposite lanes of traffic. Now going head-on with traffic, he kept the pedal pushed to the floor, going at speeds exceeding 110 miles an hour. At one point, he found an opening in the guardrail and flipped around, going head-on with the police officers, before he turned around once more. One of the officers decided to tap the Dukes to stop it. After succeeding, he then parked in front of them so they couldn't go anywhere. At least that's what he thought. The boys grabbed their pistols and started firing the police vehicles, on purpose avoiding the officers to not harm them, but instead make them back off. Jake then slammed the car into reverse and pushed the accelerator to the floor while trying to avoid the oncoming shots fired by the officers. As a last-ditch effort, he did a J-turn while going in reverse to avoid getting shot at head-on.
Sadly, with their car shot to hell, he just continued going straight into the sandy hills of the desert, instead of following the roads. They looked back before they drove over the hill, and noticed that the police in their panic hadn't noticed that they went straight into the desert and sped off down the road next to the highway. With them saying all the prayers they could think of, they hid behind the hill and abandoned the beautiful but beaten-to-hell Dukes. Luckily for them, their prayers were answered, and a gray sedan was parked next to the train tracks, possibly abandoned there. They made quick work of the car's security system and drove into a nearby railway tunnel to hide away. A couple of minutes passed, and the sirens were fading away into the distance. With their adrenaline at an all-time high, they slowly backed out of the tunnel and got back onto the highway. Jimmy came up with the idea to split up and told Jake to pull over at the nearby U-Tool parking lot so he could get himself a ride in case one of them got caught. The two then went their separate ways back to their mechanic shop where they celebrated a successful getaway. So that was the second story of Jimmy McGee and Jake Jackson. Thank you for listening to the second episode of the J&J's Misadventures podcast. We hope that you enjoyed. As we mentioned in the first episode, these stories are based on the things we have done as our characters in the roleplay servers that we play on, which currently is the server we have started, called Lore-Based Roleplay, or LBRP for short. It is a non-whitelisted vMenu-based roleplay server, so if you want to have the chance of appearing in one of our future podcast episodes, feel free to join our server. Link to the Discord and 5M server can be found in the description down below. My name is Pure Toxic.
And I'm the Monster Bull.
Bye-bye. Non-canon bonus. While celebrating, the big propane tank they had at the shop started speaking about a man in a green jacket of the aforementioned U-Tool chain of hardware stores in Vinewood. They then started praying to the propane tank and kneeling in front of their newfound god.